It's Monday, October 12th. That means it's banned and restricted announcement day like it is every week.
When will you learn that your actions have consequences?
Is this content? Omnath was effectively yeeted off of Arena yesterday. He is no longer legal in Standard. He's been suspended from Historic without pay, and he's been banned in Brawl for shitting in the punch bowl when no one asked. Is anyone surprised? No. Is anyone upset? No, not really. I guess that's not true. Some people are frustrated with the constant bannings. It's tiring and it's difficult to keep up with, and there's the wildcard issue. You get your wildcards back for the ban cards, but not the cards in your deck. But on the whole, everyone wanted Omnath gone. To get into the minutiae real quickly of the entire announcement, Omnath was around 60% approximately of decks registered for the CFB Clash events, and it was over 70% of the field for the Grand Finals this weekend, so it's kind of obvious that it was becoming oppressive. The card is obviously a pushed, metagame warping one-card value engine that was just not okay. It just took Wizards a week longer than it should have done to get rid of it, but I guess it's gone now, so we should celebrate that it's gone, but we can still say that it took too long, right? The first ban was definitely a mistake. You can defend it all you want, but it took too long. We then also saw Clover get the axe, because Clover is an engine for the Adventures style decks that a lot of the best players in Magic were touting as one of the strongest decks going into the new Standard rotation. Omnath kind of just slotted into this deck anyway, so as Wizards pointed out in their article, it was easy for people just to peel back into this, and there to be an unhealthy metagame where this is the dominant force. And this is one of the first observations I want to throw out here in terms of like where card design is going. Now, designing cards is very, very difficult, and I don't think I could do a better job. Not for shit. But there's an obvious thing here that limited archetype card engines, or parts of those engines, that require minimal effort to set up or go off with, are unhealthy for constructive play. Look at the energy cards that had to be taken out during Kaladesh Standard, and to a lesser extent the Cat Oven combo as well. There's an argument these are simply engines or selections of cards designed to be a deck ahead of time by R&D. So there's this theory that basically we're going to handle the deck by R&D, by the developers of Magic, saying these 7 cards or whatever are your food archetype, let's just say hypothetically. You put them in a deck together and voila, you're playing insert colour food deck. Now the problem with that is it's kind of dull that instead of us brewing or building things, we're just given decks by Wizards. But there's an argument that it's no different to you giving a character in a fighting game or a MOBA. So yeah, but I don't really like it personally. I think some exploration, development and innovation is nice, and being handed the tools for a deck is kind of lame. In a less doom and gloom like outlook on this, these cards are for draft archetypes and never aimed at constructed, but they require such minimal work to do anything that if the cards from the archetype are good, as say with the Adventures where they obviously are good, the value given by this small bit player becomes an easy auto-include and sometimes obnoxious to play against. When these engines utilise artifacts or enchantments that are difficult to interact with as their engine, or at low cost, or worse yet both, or alternatively a resource difficult to interact with like the abundance of food tokens that most Magic cards don't deal with, or even worse, energy in an energy pool, it removes a lot of the ability to counterplay or do anything within the confines of a normal game of Magic where, unless everyone's decks are heavily skewed towards beating, for example, a load of food tokens. So in short, this is a trend that I expect to see happen again and again until things change in terms of like design philosophy. There will be a card that is a 1 to 3 mana enchantment artifact, or sometimes creature, payoff, or engine for that set's mechanics, and then when combined with a few good or average to good cards from that, like with the energy ones, it becomes a deck, and that's just how it is. And these things often can become oppressive, as we've seen with Cat Oven and this and energy. It's just the latest mechanic being obviously a good thing and just too easy to do. Escape being banned is them trying to dismantle the chain between Lotus Cobra and payoffs like Ultimatum and Ugin, I guess, as well, without taking out those cards. I won't lie to you, I have a feeling that Cobra will catch a ban before it rotates, because there is no fucking way there isn't another Omnath, Uro, Growth Spiral, Escape to the Wild, some sort of green spell or two in the next couple of sets. Mark my words, something else will make Lotus Cobra an issue, and eventually they will just take Lotus Cobra out behind the shed and shoot it in the back of the head. So let's go back to that too many bans thing. Kibler tweeted this: What percentage of major Magic esports events in the past year have had their top deck still playable a month later? Well, I think these bans are correct, even if Escape seems a little like a wild choice. It's crazy how many tournaments have promoted formats that are immediately gone. And then this is the one I really like. If my math is right, there have been more cards banned in the past 12 months than in the past 14 years combined. And then our very own Frank Carsten, that's right, Magic the Gathering's own math scientist. He does things with numbers that I don't understand. He says the math checks out. Out of all cards banned in Standard over the past 15 years, 56% were banned in the past 12 months. And he gives a source of where he's pulled the data from, which is the Gamepedia wiki. It's not difficult to say, and it's just not a hot take to say, that is a shit ton of bans in a very short frame of time. Now, the common defensive argument around the whole new culture of banning is that would you rather regular bans and then push the envelope, or boring periods like Ixalan or Dragon's Maze? And whilst I understand the sentiment, and I do like them exploring and pushing the envelope to an extent, it's not an either-or situation. There's not a dichotomy here. It's not either boring or bans. We can have a middle ground, and arguably for the majority of Standard's lifetime, we have had a middle ground. However, there is a lot of discussion again around people claiming that other powerful cards would have caught bans in the past under this new philosophy or outlook from Wizards. In a world of constant digital magic, Standard focus, desire to be an esport, and abundance of data, they're arguing things like Valakut or Primeval Titan or Splinter Twin would have caught bans in their respective formats. But honestly, I just don't believe that's the case. In a world where Splinter Twin was illegal in Standard, as an example, there were counterplay strategies. If you went to cast a Twin on your Deceiver Exarch and they had removal, you were down cards. In current Standard, every Haymaker, and every Bit player even, generates you some mana, life, damages your opponent or draws you a card. Or sometimes, if you're a green mythic card, a selection of the aforementioned things all at once. The point I'm getting at is that a lot of older powerful cards that people talk about, things like Baneslayer Angels and stuff that were good in their respective formats, a lot of them don't generate you immediate value, so that when you do have some sort of counterplay, you aren't just replacing the card and creating an insurmountable advantage as you slam Haymaker after Haymaker. I mean, if we just look to Legacy for a moment for the cards that are still legal there that have been banned everywhere else, Oko still feels this way in Legacy, and to a lesser extent, not banned in other places because the spells that accompany them aren't as good, but Dreadhorde Arcanist. Both of these two cards, if you play them and you don't have an way to answer them within a turn or two, you aren't necessarily dead, but there's little use in playing on because whilst they don't replace themselves immediately, which is a good thing I guess, they give you a weight of advantage that is so heavy that there's just no reason to play on half the time because you can't come back from the huge insurmountable advantage that these cards generate. So we have a time in design where your proactive things that you play either replace themselves or create insurmountable advantage, and that comes from like the Planeswalker philosophy, right? Where you play a permanent, protect it, and it just generates you so much advantage that your opponent will struggle to come back from it. And we see that time and time again with every set with new Planeswalkers. And there's an irony in this. We are looking to implement incredible mechanics like the modal double face cards to help eliminate huge amounts of the variance found in Magic the Gathering, and I like this a lot, but if my opponent drew their Omnath and I didn't, it hardly even matters if I had removal. That's the thing, right? My opponent has an Omnath and I don't. Let's say I have a removal spell for the Omnath. They play the Omnath, they've gained 4 life, they've drawn a card, they might have even cracked a fetch land. I kill the Omnath now when I have priority, and I've traded 1 card for like 2.5. The game doesn't reward you for playing against those powerful, proactive strategies. It's perhaps why control doesn't seem to show up at the top tables of these tournaments, and everything's proactive Haymaker after proactive Haymaker. I said a few weeks back when I was just theorising about how can they fix the current design issues, is that if they want to keep going down this powerful slammer card, it's good because that's fun for the player and perhaps the audience, as Magic is trying its hardest to be a spectator sport, then perhaps we need better answers. Perhaps we need fail pushes and heroes downfalls that draw you a card as well. And I wasn't 100% serious about that, and I want to clarify that. I'm still not. I think that's kind of a terrible idea. Can you imagine if every removal spell replaced itself? Would be in a very weird place that wouldn't feel like the Magic of old at all. And of course that's a consideration. Am I just moaning because it doesn't feel like old school Magic? Perhaps. I would love to hear in the comment section if you think I'm just being a boomer. But honestly, I think the real answer is not to improve the removal, because we're at a point where a 1-mana card that kills pretty much any 4-drop if you have a fetch land in older formats, like, other than sticking draw a card on it or gain some life, it's hard to push further than that without making the card kind of absurd. So perhaps we need to peel back the power level of the mythic bombs that people are slamming in these games. But here is where an interesting point gets raised quite a bit. The idea of, why are we banning things when we can just change them in the digital realm on Arena? We can just change the card to do whatever we want it to, right? This is referred to as, by most, a digital errata. Hearthstone and other digital card games do it. Should Magic not look to ape this? I mean, we all know that Magic wants to be Hearthstone. It's been trying to be Hearthstone for a long time in terms of audience interaction and the game interface and stuff. It would also feel more like esports in general. Like, I don't know, the changing of hitboxes or damage numbers or gold or money costs in games like Counter-Strike, StarCraft and League of Legends. It would feel more like an esport if they could, season by season, nerf and adjust things like those games do. And we all know that Magic the Gathering wants a piece of that fucking pie, right? Esports ready. But no spectator mode on the main client, hey? This argument's often put forward by YouTubers and streamers and content creators in Magic who are predominantly on Arena. I don't want to do this thing where we call them outsiders, because that's quite frankly obnoxious and bollocks. On a side note, people were calling Croakies an outsider, or not really being in Magic, when he was pointing out how fucking stupid intentional draws are on the Arena client in tournaments. And he was right, by the way. I stand by him with this. If you're calling one of the biggest, if not the biggest Magic streamer at the moment an outsider, not within Magic, you're a fucking idiot. Anyway, so a lot of the people that were calling for the digital errata kind of thing are people who mainly play digital Magic, right? And I was wondering if the reason I was so against the idea of it is because I love paper Magic so much, and I'm fearful that if we separate digital to paper, then we end up with a situation where paper will die out and digital will survive, and that feels like it's mainly just me trying to protect what I love, but it might not be the best for the health of a competitive metagame, I guess. However, in spite of that, where I don't think I really had a rational counter-argument for the longest time, I just felt like gut feeling that it was wrong, I have thought about it quite a bit. And there's a few things that I think are quite good counterpoints, or at least things that have put my views into perspective for myself. Firstly, let's look at the way that League of Legends balances itself, with different seasons introducing new items, taking old items away, and just adjusting how items and spells and abilities in the map works in League. It's a season by season change to really spice things up, make things interesting, and fix potential huge glaring balancing issues. Magic the Gathering already has this with rotation. When cards rotate out, cards come in, and we have Magic cycling around, which can get rid of old stuff that's considered oppressive and bring in new stuff. Now, that's not good enough to deal with cards like Omnath, because they are, quite frankly, fucking egregious, but it is good enough to push out things that people aren't enjoying as much, that aren't dominating the metagame, and they have so much data they know what those cards are. In the past, things like Lingering Souls were dealt with by Thundermaw Hellkite, which was coming in the next set. With appropriate playtesting, they know what cards should be good in the future. Like, they miss stuff all the time, right? They didn't realise Thragtusk was going to be good. But with some playtesting, they should have at least a vague idea, and they can bring things in to counter other things. Doesn't excuse Oko, and doesn't excuse Omnath, but it's at least a way that this game does already ape that seasonal change that we see in things like MOBAs. Then we have this idea that perhaps the digital errata doesn't have to affect the physical cards, that the physical cards could be different to the digital cards. Again, is this a gut feeling? Is this irrational? I can't really decide. The idea that we're going to take Magic and make it into two different games where the cards do two different things, it seems like a lot of another barrier to entry in some ways. If cards just perform differently between formats, that seems just outright, out front, in my face dumb. But then again, I then think maybe in 10 years' time, looking back, when people are like, what's Legacy? And you're like, Legacy is where the cards all function as their paper original cards, and all cards are legal. Meanwhile, Standard is the digital format. Maybe that wouldn't seem so dumb in 10 years' time, looking back. And now would be the time to experiment with that, with COVID still ongoing and paper play being reduced down to small events that can be managed under COVID guidelines in most countries. Big tournaments and paper just are not happening, and probably will not happen for another year, perhaps 2 years. I know that's doom and gloom, I'm sorry, but it's probably the truth. So if they want to fuck about and at least experiment with a digital errata and what it can do to improve the game from a user experience, not having decks banned out from under you when Omnath gets taken out, for example, Now is the time. I will say this though, the idea that having cards get errated digitally and then just you having to look up the FAQs or the errata or the gatherer entry or some sort of digital app to figure out what your cards do on the tabletop, well, that already sounds stupid. I don't think I have to like explain why that sounds stupid, but Warhammer has given me another perspective on this idea, and it still makes me quite against it. In Warhammer 40k, the game pieces themselves do not have the rules attached to them in a way that you can read and understand. With Magic, for the most part, there are exceptions, for the most part, if you know the rule system and you're given a new card, as long as it hasn't got a new mechanic that needs some extra rules implemented, you can use that card in with other cards. That's how you can play someone else's deck in an event or an FNM or in Commander, draw a card, and the majority of the time you will understand, if you're entrenched with the rules, how it works with everything else. In 40k, if someone gave me this and I drew it or just pushed it up the battlefield, I would have no idea what to do with it against my opponent without a character sheet. And then that character sheet probably needs some clarification with rules as well. And GW, who make Warhammer, have been similar to Wizards of the Coast, where they've been stuffy and stuck in the past for the longest time, and only recently have they started to talk about the idea that there might be a competitive Warhammer scene, and started to errata and FAQ things when they're broken. Most recently there was a thing that reduced damage coming into Dreadnoughts. I won't bore you with the exact details, but they changed how it functioned. They changed the damage reduction down to only reducing by 1 instead of halving, to nerf Iron Hands, an army that was dominating tournament play. Now that sounds great, they do need to do that, but this is a game where the game pieces don't tell you what they do in the forefront of your mind anyway. And then there's the confusion aspect. Since the release of the newest rulebook for Warhammer 40k, which was, 2 months ago, we've had like 3 or 4 FAQs, and some of them, if you haven't read the third one, the second one now feels weird, and if you haven't read the second one, the third one might feel weird, and it's a minefield of figuring out whether or not I can shoot a character stood next to a tank, because the tank is also a named character. And I had this at an event. I went to a small 6-person event on Sunday, and people weren't quite sure, 3 of us weren't quite sure how one of the rules worked, because it's been errated 3 times. And this would be an ongoing problem for Magic if we errated paper cards alongside their digital counterparts. So, in short, and to summarise, 40k has clarified to me the idea that if we errata things in a digital sort of way, with like online data sheets and online FAQs and stuff like that for how cards work in paper, it will make the paper experience worse. However, the end user experience for digital might get better with errata. I've seen people get frustrated that there's cards on Arena that don't exist in paper, and that's kind of a slightly different argument, but in the same wheelhouse. So yeah, I'm still against digital errata, but I think it's a conversation, if at any time it needs to be had, it needs to be had now. Wizards of the Coast should experiment with it now, and then where we go from there, I don't know. So let me know in the comment section below what you think. I know you all think there's too many bans. That's not really the conversation to be had anymore, right? And we all knew Omnath needed to go. On the upside, these bans have made me think that I might actually make another Standard video. I mean, I was only like, 4 or 5 days in when I was already done with Standard for this rotation, which is quite quick for me. But now with Omnath going and Clover going, that kind of opens the format up. I just hope it's not like a blue-black flash rogues deck, because I hate that kind of style of deck with a passion. So what do you think? Is digital errata a potential fix to save the future of Magic? Do you think that design on the whole needs to change? And if so, how would you do it? Let me know in the comment section below. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I've been Vince, also known as PleasantKenobi on the internet, and I'll see you all later in the week for more Magic content and a little bit of Warhammer 2, and maybe some Baldur's Gate 3. Baldur's Gate 3 is fucking sick. I'll be streaming that later on today on Twitch. I'll see you all soon. Ta-ta for now.